I'm Gwen Gage. I'm an industrial designer. And like me, I know there are a lot of designers in the audience today. For me, I think design is a really unique career because we have a special ability to affect the way the future looks in a way that other careers cannot. But with that privilege, there's a responsibility. And for me, it's a responsibility to address problems that are often overlooked by design and help populations that are often underserved by it. So my project on malaria prevention that I'm going to talk about today came out of that personal mission. Last fall, or last summer actually, I was in contact with a few Peace Corps volunteers in West Africa. And they explained to me that malaria, this single disease, has such a disproportionate impact on people's lives. And I was really struck by how hopeless every conversation was about solving this problem. And that's really what I wanted to address with my project. So last fall, I went to a small village in southern Senegal called Niamey. And while I was there, I stayed with a family whose father, Musa, was a community healthcare worker at the village clinic. Now, he was one of the most well-educated people in the village on malaria prevention, so you would expect that him and his family were in the best possible situation to prevent themselves from getting the disease. But on just my third day in the village, his son, Mamadou, had developed a fever and felt so sick that he couldn't go to school. Later that day, he was diagnosed with malaria. And 2 days later, Musa's wife, Mariama, had fallen ill as well. So this really made something clear to me. If the people in the best position to protect themselves from the disease are still struggling, then there must be something really wrong with this prevention system that we have today. And that's what I wanted to find out. So first, I think to understand how pervasive malaria is, it's really helpful to get a sense of scale. I'm sure many of you remember the Ebola crisis from a few years ago. In that entire outbreak, there were around 29,000 cases of Ebola. Compare that to 216 million cases of malaria last year. That's like if 2/3 of the United States got malaria in a single year. Now, while 2 billion people are at risk for the disease, around 90% of the cases and deaths occur in Africa. And the scale is so important to understand because impact of that size bleeds into every other aspect of people's lives. When people are ill, they can't go to school and they can't work, and economists estimate that roughly 25% of families' income for an entire year goes towards dealing with just the ramifications of malaria alone. So there are a lot of ongoing efforts to fight malaria right now, but they are simply not enough. Somewhere, millions of people are falling through the cracks. So I looked at the life cycle of malaria to see where some of these efforts might be falling short, and I decided to address 2 specific gaps. The first is in the transmission phase, when everyone is getting bitten by mosquitoes. The second is in the delivery of medication to the most remote areas. Now, it was also really important to me that this project be a realistic solution for a rural area in a developing nation. So I set myself some guidelines that what it needed to be was cost-effective, intuitive to use with minimal guidance, and very easy to distribute with limited infrastructure. So first, let's focus on the transmission phase. One thing that's important to know is that mosquitoes don't bite all the time. They actually bite between roughly the hours of 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. Now, bed nets that people use now are doing a really good job of protecting them while they sleep, but there's currently no protection for the earlier evening hours when people are outside just hanging out. So I designed a large outdoor mosquito net to provide this missing protection. To keep costs down, it uses locally available resources like sand to create built-in sandbags that secure the space and give it some structure. It's hung using just a little bit of rope or twine that runs through channels on the top. And it was really important to me that it's useful in a variety of situations. So depending on the number of connection points, you can hang it in 3 different ways. The best one is this one on the left for 4 points of connection because it has the most usable space inside. This can fit around 15 people at a time. This is also really useful for the summer months when people often are too hot in their huts, so they sleep outside. And right now, there's no way to hang the bed nets outside, so people just end up sleeping unprotected. The second gap I addressed is in the delivery of medication to the most remote areas. So one thing I haven't mentioned about malaria yet is that it's curable. However, every year, 500,000 people die from the disease. In most cases, a simple 3-day course of medication, which is provided for free from foreign governments, can solve the problem entirely. But in these rural areas, there's not always a consistent stock of that medication. And that uncertainty is a really big problem, because what happens is it creates this distrust in the healthcare system, because people don't know if they can get care, and then they stop going to get treatment, and it just makes the whole situation worse. So I'm focusing on this last stage here, where medication is delivered by volunteers to the most remote areas. As you might expect, the road conditions in these rural areas can be really difficult for large vehicles to navigate. And some areas, some villages, are only accessible by small paths, either by foot or on bike. So, to get medication to these areas, volunteers from the community are deputized into the healthcare system and responsible for retrieving medication for their particular village from a larger city clinic. The medication that one volunteer actually collects could have to cover hundreds of people in a single village. So this is Samba. He's one of those community healthcare workers that I met with. And volunteers like Samba have to use whatever they already own to transport the medication. And in most cases, that's a backpack, which can only fit around 7 boxes at a time. So my mission was to design something that would make it easier and more efficient for volunteers to carry these boxes. I worked under the assumption that the only thing these volunteers would have access to were simple ropes or these bungee cords that everyone had on their bikes. And I really wanted the intervention to come at the manufacturing level, so there was no additional burden on the volunteer to obtain something extra. That's when I got interested in 6-pack rings, which are used to carry these heavy cans with really minimal material. By applying this concept to boxes, I thought we could create something that was really lightweight and compact enough to be included in existing medication shipments. So I eventually decided on this kind of dog bone shape cutout because it really grips the boxes well, but is easy to apply by hand. Now, the material is still in progress. For this prototype, I used a photodegrading polyethylene, meaning that over time, it breaks down into microscopic pieces. So it does not pose a threat to wildlife the way that old 6-pack rings used to. However, I ultimately aim to create this product out of some sort of biodegradable material so that it can serve the long-term health of the environment as well as provide better access to life-saving medication. So this is the final prototype in action. There are 3 layers here for a total of 48 boxes. The strip would come in a roll that would just be easily fit into existing medication shipments, and then it would be cut to the specific length once it reached the health clinic. You just fill it with boxes by hand. It holds the boxes very securely. And then you just roll it into this little compact unit. If a volunteer doesn't have a bike, they can strap one of these units to their back for 16 boxes. And if they do have a bike, they just stack the layers and secure them with a cord like this. Now, once this medication gets to a health clinic, the strip can actually serve a second life, because rural health clinics right now often lack a good system for organizing the medication, and it can just end up in a big pile on the ground, making it really difficult to tell how much medication is in stock at one time. So now, a volunteer can just take the medication right off the bike, hang it on the wall, and this will serve as a visual record for how much medication is remaining. So with this tool, a single volunteer can transport dozens of boxes at a time, increasing the capacity for these volunteers to treat more people at a faster rate, and hopefully strengthening the community's trust in the healthcare system. Thank you.